Delivered as punishment, she was thrown into the silence of a man marked by solitude. In the clash between rejection and emptiness, something impossible began to bloom, something that neither time nor pain could erase. Subscribe to our channel and feel the strength of this unexpected bond. There were places where time forgot to run, where the wind always whispered the same secrets, and where names once silenced never echoed again among the mountains. One such place was in the far reaches of the northeastern backlands, between two hills of red stone, marked only by a path of pebbles and a mud-and-stick hut covered with dry clay, where lived a man who no longer expected anything from the world, Tiberio, a lonely old countryman of Kariri blood, survivor of broken promises and water conflicts that never reached the newspapers. Kilometers away, at the edge of a decaying farm in Juazeiro da Bahia, Vitoria, a 42-year-old woman carefully folded the last black dress she would wear in her silent mourning. Widowed for 6 months from a colonel who had never spoken a kind word to her, she had inherited neither lands nor consolation, but the contempt of her brothers-in-law and the condemnation of a society that demanded of her only two virtues, submission and silence. It was commented, with poorly disguised cruelty in town circles, that Vitoria was difficult. She wouldn't lower her eyes, wouldn't accept impositions, wouldn't smile at parish events. She wouldn't bend. When her husband's estate division was contested by his brothers and the local judge refused to consider her testimony, she became an inconvenience, a thorn stuck in the family's throat. The solution, whispered in nightly meetings and sealed with an informal agreement, was cruel in its simplicity. Send her as an arranged wife to an isolated old mestizo in exchange for rights to the spring on his land. No one pronounced the word punishment, but everyone understood the nature of the sentence. Vitoria was taken before dawn, with no time for goodbyes, only a bundle of clothes and a wooden rosary that had belonged to her mother. The eldest brother-in-law, Geronimo, drove the pickup truck along increasingly narrow and rocky roads. "The old man knows you're coming," he said when they finally stopped in a clearing. "Follow that trail, and don't think about coming back." The cabin was small but surprisingly solid, with symbols carved into the doorposts and window frames. The man received her without word or greeting. He was tall, with features marked by the sun, grey hair tied in a ponytail, eyes of someone who had seen the world fall apart more than once and had learned not to expect compassion from it. He merely made space at the entrance and pointed to the corner where there was a woven palm mat. In the first days there was no conversation. Only survival shared in silence. She swept the packed earth floor, washed the few dishes in the nearby stream, organized her scarce belongings without making noise. He left with the rising sun to check traps and gather umbu and macambira, returning at dusk with food that he divided without ceremony. They slept in opposite corners of the hut. They shared the space like two castaways on the same deserted island. The first change was the medallion. While cleaning a small wooden chest that Tiberio always kept closed, Vitoria found an old silver medallion with the image of Our Lady of Sorrows. It wasn't an indigenous piece. It had delicate engravings, the work of a capital city goldsmith. She polished it carefully and placed it on top of the chest. Upon returning and seeing the exposed object, Tiberio stood motionless. He approached slowly and collected it with trembling hands, as if touching a sacred relic. He said nothing, but that night he left near her mat a small package of leaves containing wild honey, the only sweet available in that austere place. The second decisive moment was the gesture. One evening, watching him carve symbols into a piece of wood, she questioned with her eyes. He took a twig and drew 3 shapes on the ground, a triangle, a wavy line, and a spiral. Then he pointed to the horizon, to the stream, and to his own chest. She understood. Mountain, water, life. It wasn't just a language he was showing her, but a way of reading the world that had survived centuries of attempted erasure. Vitoria began copying the symbols on paper sheets she had found in an old notebook. She took care of the house with hands that now knew every corner. Her movements became gentler, his less defensive. They began to share meals sitting on the same large mat, to sleep under the same roof without invisible barricades, to converse with glances and gestures that dispensed with words. They never spoke of affection, but the silence between them ceased to weigh like judgment and began to embrace like understanding. The third and deepest transformation occurred when the men from the city appeared. They came to collect on the agreement made with Vittoria's family, demanding unrestricted access to the spring. They announced that being civilized people, she should not remain mixed, that this arrangement was temporary, that her place was serving in the family home, not hiding in the bush. Tiberio received them with a proud face and an old shotgun leaning against the wall. Vittoria, surprising everyone, including herself, raised the voice she hadn't used for a long time. She declared that this was her place, that she no longer owed anything to anyone, that the outside world had never granted her dignity, and that here, finally, she had found respect. The men laughed with contempt, but they hesitated, because there was something in the posture of this unlikely couple that disconcerted them. The quiet certainty of those who have found belonging where others saw only exile. The visitors departed with vague threats. The following night, a relentless storm broke over the backlands, making the thatched roof tremble. While Tiberio reinforced the ties so the wind wouldn't take the covering, Vittoria noticed water coming in through one of the walls. Without thinking, she ran to help, holding a trunk that threatened to give way. They worked side by side, soaked, moving in perfect synchrony as if they had been partners for decades. When they finally managed to contain the damage and the rain subsided, they were exhausted, muddy, closer than they had ever been. Laughter came first, a rusty sound in Vittoria's throat, so long unused. Then, almost naturally, their hands met. There were no declarations, no vows, only the mutual understanding that they were no longer strangers, that perhaps in that forgotten piece of the world, both had found what they no longer expected, a safe harbor. The dawn light found them asleep side by side, no longer in opposite corners, but in the center of the cabin, as if the distance they had maintained was just part of a long preparation for this moment of surrender. Vittoria awakened first, observing Tiberio's face relaxed in sleep. The lines of worry softened, the rigidity dissolved. She realized she no longer thought of returning, that the world that had rejected her seemed distant and unimportant compared to the simple dignity of this shared life. He opened his eyes and found her watching him. For a long moment they just held each other's gaze. Then, in a gesture as natural as the sunrise, he extended his hand and touched her face with calloused but gentle fingers. They needed no words to confirm what they both already knew, that exile had transformed into home. Time in the backlands is measured differently, not in hours or weeks, but in seasons of drought and rain, in Mandakaru cactus blooms, in the passage of herds. When the first purple flowers exploded on the EP trees on the hillside, Vittoria no longer counted the days since her arrival. She had learned to read the sky as Tiberio had taught her, to identify plants that healed wounds, to weave palm into resistant mats. Her hair, previously always tied in a severe bun, now fell freely over her shoulders. With some silver strands she made no effort to hide. Her hands, once soft like a farm lady's, now bore calluses from working the land, and she felt proud of each mark. Tiberio had also changed. His austere face occasionally opened into discreet smiles. He taught with infinite patience the secrets of the backlands, listened with genuine interest when she narrated stories from books she had read in her youth. On cool nights under the starry sky, they talked more. He told of his wife, taken by fever many years ago, about the small son whom men from the city convinced to take away to educate, and who never returned. She spoke of forced marriage, of loneliness within her own house, of abandoned dreams of studying beyond the few letters learned from the parish priest. It was on one of these nights that she asked to learn the meaning of the symbols he constantly carved into wood. Tiberio hesitated, as if assessing whether she deserved such trust. Then, with a twig, he drew 3 new symbols in the packed earth, a circle with rays, a series of dots in a line, and a shape resembling a bird in flight. "Rising sun," he explained, pointing to the first. "Path of the ancestors," he continued, indicating the dots. "Freedom," he concluded, touching the bird. It wasn't just a lesson in symbols, it was the sharing of knowledge that generations of farmers had systematically tried to extinguish. Vittoria began recording the symbols on pieces of cured leather, using dye from urucum and jenipap that he had taught her to prepare. She created a small notebook where she noted their meanings, adding the corresponding word in Portuguese. Tiberio observed this effort with a mixture of surprise and silent approval. One afternoon, he disappeared into the Caatinga and returned with natural pigments he had never shared before. Intense red, ochre yellow, black from charcoal mixed with resins. He showed her how to create permanent dyes, as the ancient Kariri did on sacred stones. From that day on, the symbols gained vibrant colors in Vittoria's notes. Their routine had found its own rhythm, as natural as breathing. In the morning, they worked together in the small garden where they planted beans, manioc, and corn. During the hottest hours, they stayed in the shade of the cabin, she writing, he carving wooden objects that Vittoria noticed became increasingly detailed and beautiful. In the late afternoon, they sat by the stream, watching the little birds. The nights were for stories and shared silences. They never spoke directly of love. But the trust and mutual respect had created something equally deep between them, an alliance between survivors. Tainar's arrival disrupted this equilibrium like a stone thrown into still waters. It was a scorching noon when Vittoria heard the distant noise of a motorcycle. Her heart accelerated. In almost a year, no vehicle had approached so close to the trail leading to the cabin. Tiberio immediately took his shotgun, but she touched his arm, a gesture they now made naturally. "Let me see first." What she found on the trail left her speechless, a young thin man in a worn cap, holding the hand of a girl of about 5 years barefoot, with frightened eyes and a small bundle of clothes. "Donna Vittoria?" he asked, visibly relieved to find her. "Thank God. I'm Zeka. I worked on your brother-in-law's farm. This is Taina, daughter of Sebastio, who was foreman there. Her parents—" He hesitated, looking at the child. "Sebastio and Maria left the day before yesterday. They couldn't stand the drought, went to try life in Sao Paulo. They asked me to bring the girl to you. Said only you could care for her better than they could in this situation." Vittoria felt the world spin. Sebastio had been the only one who treated her with respect at the farm, always bringing her fresh fruits when no one was looking, and now this child, looking at her with eyes that begged for safety. "How did you find me?" asked Vittoria, while crouching down to the girl's height. Zeka explained that Sebastio, before leaving, had discovered through conversations among the men at the farm where Vittoria had been sent. "Things are bad there, Donna. Your brother-in-law Geronimo is saying he'll take the water from here by any means. Says this land doesn't belong to anyone anyway." Vittoria looked at the child, then at the trail leading to the cabin where Tiberio waited. Two worlds so distant, now connected by this small displaced life. "She stays with me," she decided, extending her hand to Taina, who accepted it without hesitation. "But you must leave immediately. It's not safe for them to know you've been here." After Zeka's departure, Vittoria led the silent girl along the trail. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. How would Tiberio react? How would they care for a child under such simple conditions? What future could they offer her? As they approached the cabin, Tiberio was standing, shotgun lowered but vigilant. His face, normally expressionless, registered clear surprise at seeing the small figure beside Vittoria. "She needs us," said Vittoria simply. She tried to explain the situation, using the few Kariri language words she knew, mixed with the symbols they had developed between themselves. Tiberio observed the girl for long moments. Taina, although visibly frightened, held his gaze with surprising dignity for someone so small. Then, something unexpected happened. The man crouched down, coming to the child's height, and handed her a small object he took from one of the baskets, a woven straw doll that Vittoria had never seen before. "For my son," he explained simply, "kept for long time." And with this gesture, without need for discussion or formal agreement, little Taina was accepted. The following days were of adaptation. Vittoria reorganized the cabin's interior space, creating a special corner for the girl, with a small, colorful hammock that Tiberio wove specifically for her. Taina spoke little. The trauma of the recent separation had made her quiet, but her eyes observed everything intensely, especially the interactions between Vittoria and Tiberio. Gradually, she began to follow the old man everywhere, observing how he identified plants, how he prepared traps for small animals, how he carved wood into figures that seemed to come to life. It was Taina who, without realizing, brought the two adults even closer. One night, after a nightmare that made her wake up screaming, both had to comfort her. Vittoria held her in her arms, while Tiberio sang softly an ancient tune that his people intoned to drive away evil spirits. The girl fell asleep between them, creating a physical bridge where before there was only silent understanding. "She chose us," said Vittoria, when they finally laid the child in her hammock. Tiberio nodded, lightly touching Vittoria's face, a gesture they now made naturally. "We family now," he responded, using a Portuguese word he seemed to especially value. Tainar's presence brought not only responsibilities, but also joy to the small dwelling. Her natural curiosity gradually resurfaced as the feeling of safety grew. She quickly began to learn words in the Kariri language, repeating them with the ease that only children possess. At the same time, Vittoria began her literacy in Portuguese, using twigs to draw letters in the sand by the stream. The newly found equilibrium, however, lasted briefly. One clear morning, while gathering umbu in an area farther from the property, they heard the unmistakable sound of chainsaws. Tiberio signaled for absolute silence, leading Vittoria and Tainar along an alternative trail that allowed them to observe without being noticed. What they saw froze Vittoria's blood. Men cutting down ancient trees, marking others with spray paint, driving stakes with colorful ribbons into the ground. They were demarcating, expanding boundaries, preparing an invasion. "Those are Geronimo's men," whispered Vittoria, recognizing one of the henchmen. "They're advancing on your lands." Tiberio observed the scene with an impassive face, but Vittoria knew his eyes too well not to see the storm forming in them. "We go back," he said simply, guiding them away. In the safety of the cabin, while Tainar slept, they discussed in urgent whispers. "They will return," affirmed Vittoria, "with more men, with fake papers, with weapons if necessary. I know how they operate." Tiberio nodded, aware of the reality they faced. "My people fought long time. Now few remain. Land is sacred, but girl's life more sacred still." It was the longest phrase she had ever heard him pronounce, and the gravity of his words did not go unnoticed. "We need help," concluded Vittoria. "Someone who knows both worlds, who can intercede, seek legal protection." Tiberio considered for a moment, then mentioned a name: Jurema, daughter of indigenous woman and caboclo, now midwife and healer in Petrolina. Knows the paths, knows the whites' laws. They decided that Vittoria would go to meet her at the city market, a full day's walk away. Tiberio would stay with Tainar, protecting her and the land. Before they could detail the plan further, however, they heard the noise of vehicles approaching, now without any disguise. Vittoria felt her heart freeze. "Quick," instructed Tiberio, taking her to the back of the cabin. "Hidden exit. Take girl to dense Caatinga, hide well." He took his shotgun, a machete, a water canteen. "And you?" asked Vittoria, holding his arm tightly while waking Tainar with the other hand. His eyes met hers, firm, determined, but also full of something they had never openly expressed. "I distract, give time, then find you at Painted Rock," I showed. He touched her face briefly, then placed the medallion of Our Lady in her hand to protect path. "Now go." The last glance that Vittoria cast back, while leading Tainar through the narrow passage between the rocks, was of Tiberio standing before the cabin, tall and dignified, wielding not weapons, but the small notebook of symbols she had created, a symbolic shield against a world that refused to recognize his humanity. It was the image she carried with her as they plunged into the protection of the dense Caatinga, the sound of mail, threatening voices echoing increasingly distant. The city of Petrolina appeared on the horizon after 2 days of exhausting crossing. Vittoria and Tainar had slept in the open, eaten fruits of the Caatinga that Tiberio had taught them to identify, drunk water from the few springs that resisted the drought. The girl had not complained once. There was a surprising resilience in her, as if she understood, even without explanations, the gravity of the situation. Her small bare feet followed the rhythm of adult steps with silent determination. The first masonry houses, the cobblestone streets, and eventually the asphalt caused in Vittoria a strange feeling of displacement. After almost a year living in the simplicity of the cabin, civilization seemed excessively noisy, accelerated, artificial. Curious glances followed the unusual pair. A woman with an appearance aged by the sun, simple clothes and hair free in the wind, leading by the hand a child in a faded dress with frightened eyes. Finding Jurema would be a challenge. Vittoria only knew she was a midwife and well-known healer in the Riverside region. She decided to start at the open market. Places of commerce have always been meeting and information points in inland cities. She sat with Taina in the shade of an herb stall, watching the movement, gathering courage to ask. That's when she noticed a middle-aged woman with grey hair tied in a low bun, carrying a straw bag full of herbs and bottles. There was something in her posture, in the dignity of her walk that reminded her of Tiberio. "Excuse me," approached Vittoria, standing up with Taina. "I'm looking for Jurema, the midwife. It's urgent." The woman examined her with dark, penetrating eyes, pausing on the medallion that Vittoria still wore around her neck. "Who's looking for her?" she asked, her melodious voice carrying a backcountry accent. Vittoria hesitated only for an instant before answering. "I come at the request of Tiberio, the old Carreri. We need help." The name worked like a password. The woman's expression transformed completely, mixing surprise and concern. "Tiberio still lives? After so long?" She looked around as if checking if they were being observed and lowered her voice. "I am Jurema. Come with me, it's not safe to talk here." Jurema's house was in a remote neighborhood, a simple but welcoming building surrounded by a yard where medicinal herbs grew in abundance. Inside, the environment mixed indigenous elements, decorated gourds, images of saints adorned with feathers, with the practicality of modern urban life. After settling Taina with a glass of passion fruit juice and paper to draw on, the two women sat at the kitchen table. "Tiberio is my uncle," explained Jurema, serving a cup of lemon balm tea to Vittoria. "The last elder who refused to leave the traditional territory when the government relocated our people. I haven't seen him in more than 15 years. Her eyes studied Vittoria with curiosity. "How did a white woman come to use his protective medallion? And why did he send you to me?" Vittoria narrated the entire story. The forced arrangement that transformed into mutual respect and then into something deeper. The unexpected arrival of Taina. The imminent threat of loggers hired by her brother-in-law. She told of the men who had arrived at the cabin, of how Tiberio had stayed behind to protect their escape. As she spoke, she realized how much her life had changed, how her identity had transformed in those months with the old Carreri. Jurema listened to everything in absolute silence, her eyes occasionally turning to the girl who was drawing with concentration at the adjacent table. When Vittoria finished, the midwife sighed deeply. "The lands you occupy have been in dispute for generations. Legally, they belong to the indigenous reserve recognized in 1998, but the farmers have documents falsified during the years of the dictatorship. Now, with the new dam planned for the region, they are eager to claim any land that might be flooded. The government compensation will be worth millions." She stood up, walking to a shelf where she picked up a folder with papers. "I have been fighting in the courts for years. I've gained some allies. A federal prosecutor, an anthropologist from Funai, a young city councillor with conscience. But the power of money is strong in this region. How much time do we have?" asked Vittoria, feeling the weight of urgency. Jurema consulted a calendar on the wall. "The construction company engineers arrive in 5 days for the final measurement of the area. After them, the fate is sealed. Neither century-old trees, nor springs, nor history." And Tiberio? Vittoria couldn't prevent her voice from trembling as she asked the question she most feared. Jurema touched her hand gently. "If I know him well, he escaped. He knows every trail, every hiding place in those lands. But he cannot fight alone against machines and revolvers." That night, while Taina slept in the guest room, the two women elaborated a plan. Jurema would contact the federal prosecutor, would get an emergency injunction to stop any activity in the area based on the constitutional indigenous rights. Vittoria would provide her testimony as the widow of the former neighboring owner, confirming the illegality of the titles presented by her brother-in-law. But both knew that papers and stamps might not be enough against greed and local power. "We need more," said Vittoria, looking out the window at the starry sky, so different seen from the city. "We need visibility, witnesses, people who cannot be bought or threatened." An idea was beginning to form in her mind. What if we brought journalists, researchers, people from outside with cameras and recorders? Jurema considered the proposal seriously. "I have contacts in an environmental NGO from Recife. They have connections with the national press, but how to convince them to come for an apparently small land conflict in a forgotten corner of the backlands?" Vittoria smiled for the first time in days. With the truth, with a story they won't be able to resist. She spent the following hours dictating a letter, which Jurema typed on her old computer. It wasn't just a plea for help. It was the account of an encounter between worlds, of ancestral knowledge threatened, of an unlikely family formed in adversity. It was, in essence, a manifesto of resistance. The next morning, the message was sent by email and also by a trusted courier directly to Recife. While waiting for a response, Jurema initiated the legal procedures, and Vittoria began to prepare to return to the territory. "I cannot leave Tiberio facing this alone," she explained, when the midwife tried to dissuade her. "And Taina belongs to the world we built together, not here." "At least take this," insisted Jurema, handing her a simple cell phone. "I'll keep in touch. And this," she extended a digital camera. "Document everything, the marked trees, the stakes, any presence of invaders. It will be our proof." The return to the Caatinga was faster, as Vittoria now knew better the paths and dangers. Taina, invigorated by rest and proper food, kept pace without complaints. As they walked, Vittoria taught the girl the names of plants that Tiberio had shown her, the sounds of birds they could identify, the signs of the trail. It was a transmission of knowledge that went beyond mere survival. It was the passing of a cultural heritage that now also belonged to them. They approached the cabin region with extreme caution. Vittoria instructed Taina to remain hidden while she made an initial reconnaissance. What she found filled her simultaneously with relief and apprehension. The cabin was intact, but completely empty, with clear signs of a search, overturned baskets, torn mats. There were, however, no indications of violence. Verifying that there was no one nearby, she called Taina, and together they collected some essential items: blankets, kitchen utensils, Vittoria's notes on the Kariri symbols. "Let's go to the Painted Rock," she whispered to the girl. "That's where Tiberio promised to meet us." The place in question was a small clearing surrounded by ancient Mandakaru cacti, where a natural rock formation created a kind of shelter. There, according to Tiberio, his ancestors had conducted passage ceremonies for countless generations. They arrived at dusk, exhausted but hopeful. Vittoria prepared a small shelter with branches and foliage, lit a discreet fire, and shared with Taina the last food they had brought from the city. While the girl fell asleep, she remained vigilant, observing the shadows of the Caatinga, waiting for a sign, a familiar noise. Fatigue eventually overcame her, and she fell asleep holding the medallion firmly. It was the gentle touch on her face that awakened her. She opened her eyes to find Tiberio's intense gaze. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the emotion of the reunion dispensing with words. Then, in an impulse that surprised them both, Vittoria hugged him tightly, feeling his solid and real body against hers, the confirmation that he had survived. Tiberio, initially rigid with the unexpected physical contact, gradually relaxed, allowing himself this human comfort that had been denied to him for so long. When Taina woke up and saw Tiberio, her little face lit up with genuine joy. She ran to him without hesitation, hugging his legs with a naturalness that moved Vittoria. The man crouched down, placing a gentle hand on the child's head. "Little brave one," he said in Portuguese with a rare smile. During the simple breakfast, Tiberio reported what had happened. The men had searched the cabin looking for documents, for anything they could use against the indigenous claim to the land. He had escaped easily, knowing every hiding place in the territory. In the following days, he had observed from afar as they marked trees for cutting, mapped the spring for diversion, prepared the ground for systematic destruction. "They come with big machines in 4 days," he concluded gravely. "After land dies." Vittoria then shared her meeting with Jurema, the legal plan in progress, the message sent to Recife. She showed the cell phone and the camera. Tiberio listened to everything with attention, his dark eyes recording every detail. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he stood up and walked to a nearby rock. With precise movements, he began to paint something on its surface. Using natural pigments he carried in a small leather bag, Vittoria approached to see. It was a new symbol, 2 circles intertwined by a continuous line. "What does it mean?" she asked, although something in her heart already knew the answer. Tiberio touched first one circle, then the other. "You, me. Then he traced with his finger the line that united them. Path together, family. It was the deepest declaration of love possible between them, not in romantic words, but in symbols of permanence and union. The next 3 days were of intense preparation. During the day, Vittoria methodically photographed all evidence of invasion, marked trees, demarcation stakes, temporary camps of the hired men. Tiberio taught Tainá how to recognize and avoid dangers in the Caatinga, how to remain invisible, how to find water even in the severest drought. At night, around the small fire protected by rocks, they formed an unlikely war council, a woman whom society had rejected, an indigenous man who refused to disappear, and a child who carried within herself the possibility of a different future. On the 4th day, the cell phone finally rang with Jurema's voice. They are on their way. Journalist from TV Globo, photographer from Veja magazine, representative from the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, and the Federal Public Ministry issued an emergency protection injunction. I arrive with them tomorrow at noon on the main road. It was a victory, but everyone knew that official papers rarely stopped tractors and ambitions. We need to ensure they arrive in time, said Vittoria, concerned. Geronimo's men will also come in the morning, with the construction company engineers. Tiberio considered the situation, then explained his plan. They would use the night to create natural obstacles in the path of the machines, fallen trunks, controlled small landslides, false trails that would divert inexperienced drivers in the region. It wouldn't be enough to stop them permanently, but it could delay them enough for the witnesses to arrive. Under the silver light of the crescent moon, Vittoria and Tiberio worked in perfect synchrony, as if they had been partners for a lifetime. Tainá slept wrapped in blankets in the safety of the rocky shelter, but her future depended on that night of silent resistance. While creating barriers, diverting streams, camouflaging true trails, Vittoria felt something solidify within her, the certainty that she was fighting not just for a physical territory, but for a way of existing in the world that respected memory, diversity, the right to belong on one's own terms. Dawn brought with it the distant sound of engines. It has begun, said Tiberio, his voice calm but firm. They woke Tainá, shared a quick meal, and prepared for the imminent confrontation. Vittoria checked the cell phone, the camera, kept with her the documents that Jurema had sent, copies of the original demarcation, of the court injunction, of the recognition of the area as traditional Kariri territory. They would not be weapons against physical violence, but they carried the weight of a legality that, even frequently ignored, could still serve as a shield. Let's go, said Tiberio, extending a hand to each of them. Together, forming a small, unlikely family, they walked toward the territory's border, where the future would be decided not just for them, but for a history of resistance that refused to be erased from the map of Brazil. The roar of engines grew as they approached the territory's border. Vittoria carried Tainá in her arms, the girl silent and attentive. Tiberio led the way, his posture erect, his dignity intact, wielding only a ritual staff with ancestral symbols. The yellow tractors appeared in the landscape, along with armed men and surveying equipment. Geronimo Campos, Vittoria's brother-in-law, commanded the operation with impatient gestures. We need to delay them until noon, whispered Vittoria, checking the clock. There were almost 3 hours until the arrival of the Allies. Tiberio descended the slope alone, while Vittoria remained hidden, documenting everything with the camera. Silence fell over the group when they noticed the old Kariri's approach. I thought you had understood the message, shouted Geronimo, hand on his revolver. These lands have an owner now. Tiberio's voice sounded clear and firm. Land has no owner. Land is mother. We belong to her, not she to us. He raised the Funai document. Kariri land, protected by law. Geronimo laughed, now openly holding the weapon. What law reaches here, Indian? I have official authorizations and I'm in a hurry. The dam won't wait. The tension was escalating when a child's cry cut through the air. Everyone turned to one of the pickup trucks, where a young woman was trying to calm a baby. Get that boy out of here, Mariana, shouted Geronimo. Vittoria noticed the change in the atmosphere. The baby's cry had introduced humanity into a scene of imminent violence. With a deliberate movement, Tiberio approached the truck, ignoring the gun pointed at his chest. It's heat and thirst, he said calmly. The Caatinga feels the pain before people do. He offered a gourd. Water from sacred spring, refreshes and calms. The young mother accepted the offer with trembling hands. The baby drank and immediately calmed down, looking curiously at Tiberio. "How did you do that?" asked Mariana, impressed. "Water knows child, child knows truth," he replied, gently touching the little one's forehead. "Strong boy. Great future." At this decisive moment, Vittoria emerged from hiding, bringing Taina by the hand. "Good morning, Geronimo. I imagine you didn't expect to see me again." The farmer turned pale. "Vittoria, what are you doing here?" "I live here now," she answered simply. "With my family." She placed herself beside Tiberio with Taina between them. "Taina?" Mariana recognized the girl, her voice trembling. "You are with them?" "They took care of me when my dad and mum left," answered the child with surprising firmness. "This is my home now. This is absurd," exclaimed Geronimo, destabilized. "This land has documents, has authorization." "Falsified," replied Vittoria, showing the copies provided by Jurema. "And I have your testimony of sending me here as punishment. But I found dignity, respect, and eventually, love." The impact of this declaration was visible on Tiberio's face, the first time they verbalized the feeling. "The press is on the way," she continued. "Journalists, lawyers, indigenous representatives will arrive in less than 2 hours. I have dozens of photographs documenting this illegal invasion." Geronimo was visibly calculating the risks when an unexpected voice emerged. "Dad?" "She's right." Mariana stepped forward, baby in arms. "What we're doing is wrong. This land is sacred to them, and what we did to Vittoria was cruel, unworthy of our family." Engines approached, a Funai jeep, a television truck, and an official car from the public ministry. Geronimo recognized defeat. "Turn off the machines," he ordered. "Let's go. And the compensation money, boss? There will be other deals. This battle is lost." As the invaders withdrew, Jurema embraced Tiberio and Vittoria. Official documents confirmed the protection of the territory. Journalists recorded everything. "Why, Vittoria?" asked Geronimo before leaving. "Why choose this way of life?" "Because here I learned that value isn't measured in hectares. That family forms by choice, not just by blood. That knowledge exists in many forms." She smiled, watching Taina showing medicinal plants to a journalist. "And together we teach Taina that it's possible to build bridges between worlds." The years passed. The cabin transformed into a cultural center, where researchers documented traditional knowledge. Vittoria recorded everything in books on indigenous medicine and symbolic language. Taina grew up fluent in 2 cultures, becoming a mediator between realities frequently in conflict. When Tiberio departed to join his ancestors, his tomb bore Kariri symbols and words in Portuguese, testimony to the life between worlds he had chosen. Vittoria continued the documentation work with Taina, now graduated in anthropology and indigenous law. At the center of the small community that flourished, an ancient tree sustained the symbol created by Tiberio, 3 circles united by a continuous spiral: family, past, present, future. And when visitors asked about the history of that uncommon place, Vittoria told them about how she had been sent as an exile, only to find her true home. About a man who had taught her to read the world through symbols. About a girl who united 2 worlds. And about how in the harsh lands of the northeastern backlands, a family was born that Brazil didn't expect, but that perhaps was exactly what it needed to learn to recognize. If this journey between worlds touched your heart, share your feelings in the comments. Subscribe for more stories that connect tradition and transformation, and leave your like. As Tiberio and Vittoria taught us, the most beautiful stories